Hello, beautiful human beings. Welcome back to the Ryan Magic Show. Today's episode, are boundaries barriers? That's a quote coined by Tony Robbins. And I'm going to talk all things boundaries in this episode. Are they healthy or not? What do they look like? And helping support the way that they are communicated. And there's a lot of conflicting ideas around this. So I'm excited to talk about it and get into this episode. So let's do it. Before jumping in, I want to let you know that if you haven't left a review on the podcast yet, please do that. It makes a huge difference. And I appreciate it a lot. And I also want to seed the fact that when I'm back from India, which is start of September, I'm going to be teaching Vedic meditation. That's why I'm in India. And I'd love to teach you. It's the most powerful tool I've ever learned in my entire life. It's very affordable compared to a lot of other courses and tools and things you can pick up. And I'd love to pay that forward to you. So keep an eye out for that. Let's get into this. So this is something as a recovering people pleaser and someone that's had, I'm just going to be honest, a low self-worth in my life. I've really struggled in relationships, not just in romantic relationships, but I've struggled with my family. I've struggled with friendships, and I've struggled at knowing what is healthy and what isn't, even in work relationships. And so for that reason of having those struggles and challenges, I've had to do a lot of learning and a lot of practice around communication, conflict resolution, and relating. And there really is a lot of conflicting messages in the space around what is and isn't healthy when it comes to boundaries. There is one train of thought that says, well, boundaries are barriers. If you're saying, hey, this is a boundary, you're pushing someone else away, and that's unhealthy. And then there's another school of thought that says, if you don't actually work on your own sovereign sense of wholeness, then you're going to come in and you're going to be codependent on others. So you need to be able to set boundaries. You need to be able to know what is yours and what is theirs. And you need to be able to have your own back and be okay being alone. And it's really a interesting topic to discuss. Now, the first thing that I'm going to make overtly clear here is that boundaries are what create the entire universe. It's not like, can we have boundaries or not? Nah, boundaries are barriers. You shouldn't do that. They are barriers. And to get pretty high level into spiritual theory for a second, if we talk about the quantum realm that Joe Dispenza speaks of, or the unified field, that unmanifest field of potential is where everything comes from. And before the building blocks of reality actually manifest into the world, there's no barriers. There's just oneness. Everything just is. It is a unified field. Everything's connected. We are all one. Everything is one. That's the theory of the unmanifest world, the absolute isness, totality, total, whole, wholeness. And so the only way that consciousness as a malleable resource and building block of this material world that we have, if you've ever done a plant medicine ceremony and you've seen the fractals or the atoms of life, the building blocks of life, it really reveals to us what's going on all the time that we forget because we're so in our identity and in our world, and our reality is taking all of our undivided attention. It can be very easy to forget the fact that we are literally mainly space. We all know this from physics, that all solid objects are mainly space. It's just energy. We're just all vibration. And we understand that as a truth because we can see it if we zoom in enough in the microscope that we're mainly space. But how on earth does that relate to us living in the world if we're mainly space? Yeah, cool. Hear that, but if I open palm slap you in the face, it's going to hurt. And so whenever I've seen beneath the veil and pulled back and look under, and I'm in a plant medicine ceremony and I'm seeing the fractals, I'm looking at my hand, I'm looking at a stick, looking at the rocks on the ground, looking at my drink bottle, and everything is made of the same consciousness. I can see it. And then I've had this revelation many times, especially earlier on in my journey of doing plant medicine, that, wow, I'm not as unique. I am super unique, but I feel a little bit less big because I can see that everything's made of the same stuff. And there are billions and billions of different things made of the same stuff. And it kind of made me realize, holy crap, I am a drop in the ocean. Metaphorically speaking, I am a drop in the ocean, and the ocean's filled with billions of potential drops. Okay? So hold that thought. Plant medicine. I reference it here and there in this podcast, but I don't really give too many guidelines around it or suggestions around it. And I'm just going to give a strong recommendation to only do it if you have professional, extremely experienced guidance during a sacred ceremony format. AKA, you could go to a ayahuasca center like Rhythmia in Costa Rica, which is a very professional setup, and you could do it in a space that feels really safe. The second piece that I will say is not only doing it with a super experienced shaman or maestro or leader that can hold space and facilitate, but one that you personally in your own knowing in your own body feel incredibly safe around, if that's something that you feel called to. I don't think plant medicine is a necessity for someone to continue to expand on their spiritual path. I think it's an option, and it's one that has benefits and drawbacks. Some of the drawbacks is that it creates a bit of a gap between awareness and embodiment. If someone does lots of plant medicine, they're going to have this really big divide within them where they whiplash between their awareness in certain states, but then their nervous system is not attuned to that state. And so they walk around actually feeling worse than what they did before doing it, because the distance between what they know and what they can actually hold as a reality, as a state of consciousness, is completely different. That can be really, really detrimental for someone's quality of life and actually not speed up their journey, can actually slow the journey. And so slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I wouldn't recommend doing plant medicine any more than like 3 times a year, and then really deeply integrating if you were going to do it. But what, in my opinion, is significantly more powerful and integrative is a twice daily meditation practice. And you need no substance in your body. And the integration is so powerful and palpable because you step into actually a deeper state than you do in plant medicine when you transcend with Vedic meditation. And there's no substance, and you touch it twice a day. You, in your day, normal consciousness, touch complete enlightenment back to your day, and you can kind of bring 0.01% of that enlightenment into your day. And then later in the day, you touch it again. And then you leave that second meditation of the day having touched enlightenment briefly, and you can integrate 0.01% of it again. And you do that daily over multiple years, and your state of consciousness is steadily and solidly evolving. Okay, so a little sidetrack there. The whole point of what I was saying is, if you can see that the building blocks of reality is consciousness shaping itself, then what stops it from just, if everything's just one, how am I different to the drink bottle? And the answer is, in manifest reality, the most powerful force in the universe is ignorance. Ignorance is a force that deludes us into believing that we're separate. And that conditioning, that energy of ignorance is what holds us separate and creates that divide In other words, there are boundaries between us and other things in the material world. Now, if we didn't have ignorance, if we didn't have boundaries, there would be none of this. We'd just be oneness. We'd just be all floating. Like, imagine your body just disintegrates into all these different atoms and just merges with the laptop, merges with the walls, and the brain's gone. It's disintegrated. The only thing that allows us to have this experience of life is boundaries. So boundaries are the human condition. It's a necessity for safety. And I'm just going to pre-frame that there is like construction happening right next door. There is construction in this happening right next door. There is construction happening in our street over the road on exactly opposite us. And there is construction happening 3 houses down on the street. So, and there's actually construction because we live here near a freeway, on the freeway right over there. So there's a lot of creation happening right now around this energy. But if you can hear a little bit of nail gun action, that's what's going on. Anyway, boundaries are needed for reality. If you're like, I don't need boundaries, it's like, you're in a boundary. Your skin is the boundary between you and the world. You don't need boundaries. Cool. Right? Let's just rip your skin off. Good luck with that. Boundaries is what actually contains things. Boundaries are a masculine energy of containment. They are very much required for safety. The masculine energy, one of the primary roles of masculine energy is containment and creating a perimeter. If there was yourself as a member of a tribe, and let's say there are 10 men, 10 women, the masculine male role in the tribe is to draw a perimeter and say, this is our territory. You are not allowed to come in here. And then if an intruder comes in, done. Push them out. If they continue trying to come in, they get killed. That's how it works in the wild. That's how it works with dingoes as well. Dingoes have a territory, and they use their masculine perimeter creating quality of setting boundaries. When they have offspring, it's about 6 pups they'll keep. The dingo pack's about 15, 16. The offspring that once they're fully grown, after 6 months, they are fully grown. If they don't leave the perimeter, then they kick them all out. If they don't leave the pack and the boundary, if they're even 1 foot in the boundary, they get killed. Welcome to the real world. This is a requirement for safety. This is our territory. This is how we know what is ours, and this is how we know what isn't ours. And that gives and creates a sense of stability and safety, containment. If there were no boundaries, I don't need boundaries in my relationship. It's like, cool. So you can just make love with anyone, having an orgy. There's no boundary. There's me, there's them. I've got Lucy over there. I've got Jared over here. There's no boundaries between my whole family. They're all in here. We're all doing it. No. There's a boundary that says, no, this is my body, this is your body, and they're separate. And that's healthy. If that didn't exist and you're just having orgies with everyone you know, it's not going to feel very safe, is it? I know it's a weird example to give, but I'm trying to really make the point of, we don't have boundaries. What does life look like? There's no stability. There's no containment. And therefore, there's going to be a very limited safety. Now, if someone had infinite safety and they didn't care, let's say you're in a relationship, romantic relationship, and you're just completely safe with anything, nothing triggers you, you're enlightened, you wouldn't care. Yeah, you can go sleep with them, you can go do this, you can slap me, you can stab me. It's okay. I don't have any boundaries. You can put that knife inside my skin. I don't care. I don't have boundaries. We need boundaries. We need boundaries. Boundaries are barriers. Absolutely they are. And we need barriers. We need things to delineate, this is mine and this is yours. And the thing that underpins boundaries is safety. And this is the really big piece of this podcast that I want to drive home. The only reason I would need a boundary in a particular relating dynamic is because without it, I feel less safe. Without it, I feel less safe. I'll give you an example of some boundaries that I have with friendships. Now, I've got a trigger of being given unsolicited advice. It's a trigger. A trigger means I feel unsafe when it happens. I feel unsafe when it happens because when that happens, I feel unworthy because I don't have full safety and unconditional love in that dynamic. I don't feel whole. Someone gives me some feedback, triggers a wound of being given lots of feedback when I was a kid, constantly micromanaged and developed toxic shame as a result. So even though I've worked on this a lot, if someone says, I think you should actually do this and speak to your partner like this, and you should actually work more. Someone saying that to me, I start to get triggered because I'm not fully enlightened in that way. I've got insecurities there. I've got lack there. I've got fear there. I'm scared. I'm scared in that moment. I'm starting to go, oh, I'm getting hot. I'm feeling less worthy. I'm feeling unsafe. So I have a boundary that says in my connections, I need permission before being given advice. So you need to ask for permission. If you want to be close to me and you want to be my friend, you need to ask for permission before giving it advice, right? That's only needs to happen because I'm insecure in that way. If I was completely felt safe and solid in who I was, the boundary wouldn't even be a requirement, wouldn't even be needed. Yeah. So all boundaries are there for insecurities. And there's nothing wrong with that. I have a boundary with my partner that she can't sleep with other people or kiss other people. Why? Because I'd feel insecure. I'd feel jealous. I'd be scared of abandonment, scared that she's going to sleep with someone else and then she's going to leave me for them. If I didn't have that fear, it wouldn't be a problem. But I do, and it is a problem. So welcome boundary. So boundaries are barriers, absolutely. And I want the barrier between my partner and other people because I feel scared if not, because I'm a human. And so part of boundaries that is powerful is honoring our humanity, honoring our fragility, our fears, our imperfections. And for such a long period of time, because I was insecure and I had a lot of pleasing and insecurities around other people and just in general, I would constantly be questioning my boundaries. If I was to say to someone, hey, just so you know, that's not okay it's not okay for you to speak to me like that. Yeah, I'm going to set a boundary here. Just pause. I wouldn't be able to do that because I didn't know, is that okay that I said that? That's really mean. Am I a bad person? Was that uncool? Is that unhealthy to say that? Are they not going to like me? What if they yell at me? And so because I had this insecurity that was underpinning my capacity for boundaries, then I didn't have my nervous system and my inner child didn't have an inner knowing that life was safe around other people. Because I didn't even know if someone does something and I feel unsafe, I don't even know if it's okay for me to set a boundary, let alone set it. Then maybe if I get really triggered, I just lash out and be like, hey, you shouldn't have done that. Now all of a sudden I'm condemning someone else because I don't know how to keep myself safe. So if boundaries have a role of creating a barrier, as Tony Robbins suggests, but he says it in a negative light, boundaries create barriers, aka don't have boundaries in your romantic relationship. He's trying to make a point because you can overdo boundaries. However, I feel like it's an unhealthy concept to say boundaries are barriers in a negative tone because they are barriers, but to feel guilty for having barriers is being gaslit to know that it's not okay to keep ourselves safe. It's not okay to keep ourselves safe. Now, one thing that I recently learned at a workshop I was at about myself was that I had a really big insecurity and I gaslit myself on being able to firmly set boundaries. Because again, like I was just suggesting before, I didn't even know if it was okay to set a boundary. Is that me being mean? Is that too much? And as a result, like I was just saying, then whenever I went to a social situation, I would have a bit of anxiety in my system. Because if something went down that was uncomfortable, instead of just being able to say, hey, just want to let you know when we're chatting, for me, if you're going to ask for advice, if you're going to give advice, for me, just check in first. And that's a boundary. Why? Because I feel unsafe because of my own insecurities. It's my stuff. And I'm just going to let you know it's a boundary not to do that because I feel scared when that happens. Because when I was younger, my dad was constantly giving me feedback, constantly telling me where I wasn't doing well, constantly giving advice, constantly controlling me and micromanaging me. And I don't want to see my dad in you when that happens, right? That's a boundary. Now, when I can say that, then my body knows, okay, if Ryan's in a situation where he feels unsafe, he has the capacity to create safety for himself in that dynamic. So now I can relax and feel a bit safer. But what happens for a lot of people is they've unconsciously gaslit themselves to not feel worthy or deserving of having boundaries at all. So as a result, they go into social situations and inherently have, even if it's not a super overt, but it's just a subtle feeling in their nervous system that situation is not safe. And if someone's got that subtle feeling of not being safe in their nervous system, then they're in their head. They're in fear consciousness, which means that they're not present. They're going to be feeling some aspect of pressure, which means that they're not going to be able to be authentic, which means that they're not going to be able to experience love and deep connection and genuine connection. And I didn't realize this, that even up until, I'm going to say 6 months ago, I've done a lot of work on authentic relating and tantra and relationship coaching and conflict resolution and communication courses, like for a decade. But I didn't even realize that even with some of my closest friends, I didn't have the capacity to speak truths. And therefore, I wasn't even able to feel fully safe around the people that I would consider closest to me in my whole life, even in my romantic relationship. Because there was a part of me that was still, at least at a somatic level, like in my body, not feeling it was okay for me to have boundaries, because I would have this inner critic, this gaslighting voice internally going, yeah, but you're only setting that boundary because of your insecurities. So lean in, lean in. And if you're anything like me and you're listening to this, probably tells me that you're into the growth journey. We're always leaning in. Life is a constant leaning in. We're saying yes to growth. We're saying yes to challenge. We're saying yes to our highest evolution. So that can be shadowy at times. And I've learned for myself, when it comes to people, when it comes to relationships and interacting with other people, it's so important for me to actually feel safe around other people and be able to value tribe, value friendships, value community, value intimate relationship. I need to actually learn to create safety in myself around people. And it's different for me being around people than it is playing my life as a lone wolf. And I've never really sustained a consistent level of, I guess, a sense of belonging in my entire life, because I've never actually learned to feel safe around people, because I couldn't even feel safe around mum and dad growing up. And I've got a sneaky suspicion on some level, it just might be the same for you. That's not cool. That's not cool. That's really sad that someone, or I'm just going to speak for myself, that's really sad that I haven't been able to feel safe around other people my whole life because I didn't feel safe around my parents. And so boundaries for me, even if I put myself into the category of having more triggers or more relational wounding than the average person, which I perceive that to be true, I may have extra big triggers for extra big boundaries required. I've got a boundary to, that request to not give advice. That's a big one for me. I ask for advice all the time from my coaches, but then at least I have some sense of control, which is control is how we create safety. If we're feeling unsafe, we try to control. We could control someone's response by pleasing them. We can control someone's response by being aggressive. We can control ourselves by eating certain food that makes us feel a certain way. We can control our state by scrolling on social media and control our feelings by avoiding how we're feeling. So if we're unsafe, we're in control. If we're in our head, we're trying to control. And control is not a bad thing. Like boundaries aren't about. Boundaries are control. If you're setting a boundary, you're trying to control the situation. I'm creating a perimeter here that I can feel safe within. Then over time around other people, the more that you practice your authentic needs and boundaries, the more that you're able to practice setting boundaries and feel comfortable with them, then you can create a baseline level of safety inside of yourself. That this is where it starts to get juicy. Once you've learned to create boundaries and set boundaries, communicate boundaries, and reiterate boundaries, just because you say it once, it doesn't mean someone else is just going to be able to follow it forever. You might have to reiterate it multiple times, and that can take courage. Once you've done that enough and practiced that enough, then your nervous system and your inner child will have a baseline level of safety. Then you can start to open up in your own discernment and at your own pace. So for me, I do lean into receiving advice from people and asking for advice, or someone giving me advice unsolicited. But instead of reiterating that boundary, now I'm like, okay, I feel safe enough. I don't feel fully safe, but I'm actually going to let that land and see if I can find value in that, see if I can create safety in my own self with that person giving unsolicited advice or opinions. And so I can play with it now, but I can only play with it now because I've been strong enough to know, hey, and this is a really big part of this equation, I deserve to have boundaries. And this is the key point. The people that are safe enough, trustworthy enough, and deserve to have me in their life will respect that. People that are safe enough, that feel whole enough in themselves, that deserve to be in my life, will respect my boundaries because they'll want me to feel safe. They'll want me to feel safe. So, AKA, set boundaries. And if someone ultimately doesn't accept your boundaries, they're probably not the healthiest friend. They're probably not the healthiest friend. Now, just to distinguish something here, if you're setting a boundary that you've never set before with someone you've known for a while, it's pretty normal and healthy or common for someone to respond a little bit uncomfortably to that. They might feel uncomfortable and nervous of rejection, like you've triggered them, and they feel a little bit anxious about that. That would be a common response. And so just because we set a boundary and we've done it for the first time, probably quite messily, that doesn't mean that the other person should just take it on board in their stride and have no reactivity to it. It would be very common if you've never set boundaries before and you've kind of been walking around being very pleasing in your demeanor to all of a sudden set a boundary and for that to trigger someone. And so the key is to stick at it and to do it more, because the more that you do it, the softer and the gentler and the more lovingly you'll be able to communicate them. If you're like holding it in, oh my gosh, I did that thing, and it's just like, should I say it? And then you finally say it, and there's all this emotion there and frustration, and you let out the boundary. It's going to be more difficult to communicate it smoothly, where you feel safe and therefore you're relaxed. Whereas if you feel super comfortable setting boundaries, you might say, hey dude, just reminding you that I don't like unsolicited advice. No, you didn't mean anything by it, but just wanted to bring it up. Yeah, casual, easy. But if it's the first time, it's like, hey man, are you comfortable with me sharing a truth that's coming up for me right now? Yeah, I kind of feel like you're just projecting advice at me there. And then the person might be like, oh, he's saying I'm projecting. I need to defend myself. Oh, I don't know if I was. I kind of felt like you were. And the whole thing's a bit more gentle. Whereas when we're setting boundaries, the way to do it healthily is to be very clear that it is our stuff. If we need a boundary to be honored, it's because we have a fear. So if I say to someone, can you please not give unsolicited advice? That's because I have insecurity. It's not it's them not giving advice. It's not that them giving advice is wrong per se. It is often unconscious, and it's often coming from a place of trying to change someone unconsciously. So it's not the healthiest thing, but it's not inherently wrong because someone else that doesn't have that trigger could have received what they said without getting triggered. So is it a me thing or a them thing? I'm just going to say it's a me thing. And that's going to be received very differently by the person that's who's being communicated about that boundary to. So if I say, hey, just going to request that you do not give unsolicited advice to me. And I want to take full ownership for the fact that the only reason that's the case is because I have an insecurity of being given advice. That's not your fault. But I'm just going to take ownership and say, the reason I want you to request if you're going to give unsolicited advice, and also be detached. If I say, no, I don't want that advice. No, it's not about you. It's about me. Is because that's going to make me feel safer. And I actually feel scared when someone gives me unsolicited advice because I've got insecurities based on my childhood. Now that person's going to be so much more open to receiving that because I'm not implying they've done anything wrong. And I'm taking full ownership for my fears, my insecurities. And I need to create a barrier, a boundary, a barrier. I'm going to create a barrier. We could have been exchanging there between us. You could have been giving the advice. I could have been receiving it. But I've just gone, barrier. No, I want to stop that right there. And I've created a barrier. But if that barrier was needed, but because someone's been gaslighting themselves and saying, oh, is it okay? Or sure, is that going to be mean? What if they reject me? Then that person's going to sit there listening to the advice, feeling unsafe, and then not able to be authentic with that person. So both people lose out there from the lack of authenticity, the lack of safety. And so it's just the truth. Boundaries are needed because we're imperfect people. And part of learning to be a healthy communicator, part of learning how to be relationally mature is learning to bring our authentic self while respecting other people's humanity. That's it. That takes practice. Respecting other people's authentic self and celebrating it while also honoring our own humanity. Hey, I love that you're so smart and you've got all this epic wisdom and advice to give. I actually just don't have the capacity to receive that because I'm scared. So I'm just going to request that you don't give me unsolicited advice, because even though it's really epic advice, and I'm sure what you're going to say has got wisdom in it, I don't have the capacity to receive it. So if you give it to me, I'm going to be feeling scared. I'm then going to go into freeze. We're not going to have an authentic connection, and it's going to be a lose-lose. Yeah, that's the gist of what's happening. So boundaries are very, very important, very, very important. And if they're delivered with self-ownership, they're going to create so much trust for you, but also the other person, also the other people. And I know that over time, your social confidence, in other words, your social safety and your capacity to be authentic around other people is going to be inextricably tied to your capacity to know that you deserve to have boundaries and your skill in communicating those boundaries. Yeah. So boundaries are very, very important. And so let's address what Tony's saying from my hypothesis. He's saying boundaries are barriers. You know, Tony's cool. Tony's amazing. He's super impressive. He's super wise. But he has some blind spots too. He's a human. But around this, the point that he's trying to make when he says boundaries are barriers and he's saying it negatively, he's saying that if someone feels righteous to say, no, this is actually my money, my boundary, it's not okay for you to talk to me like that, there's separation being created. And I think that he's also communicating and speaking to, with that quote, the vilification of other people, vilifying them, making them out to be wrong. Hey, this is a boundary that you don't do that. And it's creating separation, but also by incriminating the other person. You shouldn't have done that. That was wrong. I'm going to put a boundary in place here. You're bad. I'm better than you. I'm better than you. You suck. I'm just exaggerating now. But that's kind of what people imply a lot of the time. Instead of being able to really be strong, hey, it's not okay to talk to me like that because I'm insecure. Now, that is something that I agree with Tony, that I'm just making up stuff here, meaning like I'm just mind reading. I don't know for certain that that's what he's getting at, but it makes sense, right? A lot of the time people are just like, I'm actually sovereign and I've got my needs met and I don't need you. And so I'm just going to be over here with my boundaries. And he's trying to say, when you choose to be with someone else, actually opening up and allowing the giving and receiving and my problems to be your problems too, creates a unity in a team. And I'm going to talk about that in a different episode. But being able to take responsibility is a very important aspect of setting boundaries. No one's done anything wrong. Having said that, if you set a boundary to someone and you've repeated yourself multiple times and they continue to either consciously or unconsciously neglect, then that's where you can bring out a bit more directness out of self-respect to raise the level of assertion for the boundary. So you could say, okay, cool. I'm just reminding you of that boundary that I've set for the third time now. Look, if it happens again, I'm just going to have to take a break from our connection. I love you. And I know you're not doing it on purpose, but also I perceive that if you put more awareness on it, I need you to try harder because I don't feel safe when you do that. And I don't feel like you're respecting the boundary. It's my boundary. I need it because of my insecurities. And I love myself enough to make sure that when I'm around people that they care enough about me to put the conscious effort into taking on board my request. And if you can't take on board the request or you don't want to take on board the request, I'm still going to love you, but I'm just not going to be around you because I respect myself. And that is a really, really powerful stance to be able to hold. Not from a place of malice. It's not well, fuck you, I'm not hanging around you anymore. You did this to me. It's just I respect myself first. And I'll give you time. I'll be patient. I'm acknowledging this is my area, but I'm also acknowledging that I'm choosing to have this as a boundary so that I can feel safe around you. Yeah, there's self-respect there, and that's an increase in self-worth. And what does it require to be able to say that and know that and own that? It requires you to know that you're okay without that person. Yeah. And if you're not okay without that person, then maybe you need to not care about your boundary and accept you're not going to feel safe around them. Is that worth it? I don't know. I lean more on the side that it's not. And if I look at my circle and the people that I have close to me, most people have been completely respectful of my boundaries. And there's been like one or two people that haven't. And those people I've taken breaks from. And doing that from a place of self-love has caused that other person to respect me more. So when I've actually gone back into reconnection with them, they've actually treated me better because I've taught them to treat me well. Yeah. Another example was that when I was in a previous relationship, I would set boundaries and they would never be acknowledged, but I would never do anything about it other than just get angry. That was a boundary. You broke it again. And after like 6 to 9 months of the same boundaries being broken every week or two, I was like, well, it's not a very solid boundary if I can't even enforce it. And I literally ended the relationship because I didn't feel like my boundaries were being respected. Now that wasn't, I'm better than this person. There was a collaboration of the dynamic that led to that point. But just that was the straw that broke the camel's back, or not. That's not the right way to put it. The factor that had me choose that the relationship is coming to an end was a choice of self-love, knowing I have enabled someone to treat me without respect. If I had been more clear from the start, maybe it wouldn't get to this point. If I'd taken some space earlier, if someone disrespected my boundaries, that I communicated clearly and lovingly, then maybe they would have changed the way they treated me. Yeah. This just comes back down to the quote from a recent episode of Everything is Optional. They go, but I set the boundary and they're not listening. Yeah, well, you've got the option of choosing not to engage in that. And a lot of what people experience in the world is things where they just think it couldn't be any other way and this is just how it is. And what am I meant to do about it? Like, there's a lot you can do about it. You just have to know that you can hold yourself if there's conflict that arises and that you can have your own back. And saying this right now with the level of self-respect that I'm holding and that I hold in these conversations now, very different to where I was 10 years ago. Very different, even very different to where I was 5 years ago. And I feel safer, which means that I can be more of my authentic self, which means that I can actually build deep connections with people. They respect me more and trust me more. I'm more inherently likable for who I am. If I'm being a pleaser and people like me because I'm a pleaser, then when I'm being my authentic self, they might not even like that version. So boundaries are barriers. Boundaries are required. The way that you navigate it, I've explained the nuances there around taking ownership, but also continuing to assert them. And if people don't respect them, having enough self-respect to choose to set your own boundary. And that really is the key. Boundaries are it's like, I'm putting a boundary here. If you put a fence up and say, don't come past my fence, and then people do and you don't do anything about it, that's not a real boundary, because the boundary needs to be something where you can hold it. If it's just something that's stated and you can't hold it, it's not really a boundary because people are still going to cross it. So a boundary ultimately is something that's our responsibility to enforce. And if you're like, people don't respect my boundaries, it's because you're not able to hold your boundaries, right? Now, the last thing that I'll say before I wrap up this episode is that, which I touched on earlier, but I'm really going to hit this point home in romantic relationships, that the purpose behind boundaries is to create safety. And the purpose behind safety is to be able to experience presence, fulfillment, love. So ideally, boundaries, the function of a boundary is that we can actually establish enough safety with the people that we're setting boundaries with so that we can open up more and exchange love more. That's the purpose. The purpose of a boundary is to actually feel safer so that you can give and receive more love. Because if you're not setting boundaries and you're constantly feeling like you don't deserve to set boundaries and gaslighting yourself, and there's anxiety there around other people, then that's just going to get worse. You're just going to feel less and less safe. It's going to be more and more difficult to open up, which means that it's going to be constantly challenging you because you're not able to set boundaries. There's no safety to open into. So the heart will always be quite closed. So you'll end up giving less love and receiving less love from that person because you're not going to feel safe to receive it because you don't know if they're actually safe, and you're not going to feel as open-hearted to be able to give love to them. So the reason we set boundaries is so we feel safe, so that we can continue to actually have greater capacity to give and receive love. So boundaries are barriers. Sure, they might in a moment mean that there's less giving and receiving of love, but the net total of being able to be someone that can enforce boundaries actually equates to more love because there's more safety in those dynamics. So let's understand where Tony's coming from, but actually give a bit more discernment here and not play to the extremes. See, this is a problem with the personal development space, is that people want to get off on extreme ideas. Boundaries are barriers. They're not good. Everyone says they're good, but I've got a divisive other perspective. Well, there's an in-between. They're helpful. But again, it's not just one's right, one's wrong. There's a middle ground. There's a nuance to this. So I'm going to let you play with this and ask yourself the question, where have I been afraid to set boundaries or not giving myself permission for boundaries, that if I could set them and learn to communicate them healthily in that area, I could actually feel safer and lead to a future of more giving and receiving love there. Or on the off chance that they don't respect them, then I know that I'm whole, worthy, and complete of then creating the space for someone to come in that will love me for who I am, with my level of capacity and with the amount of safety that I can feel as who I am. And this is an area that is a challenge. I still struggle with this. It's so challenging for me. I'm so scared that I'm going to get rejected. And do I deserve it? Because I was reinforced a million times over as a kid. That's an exaggeration. Thousands of times as a kid that it wasn't okay for me to have boundaries. So I developed the unworthiness and the unsafety in setting boundaries, and just was kind of raised to be in the experience of hypervigilance around other people. And to turn the tide on that, boundaries are a big factor for me. So love you guys. Please leave a review on this podcast. Keep an eye out for my meditation courses and workshops. And I love you all. And I'll chat to you in a future episode. Peace.